I bought the property quietly, deliberately, and without any announcements. No ribbon cutting, no social media bragging, no waving to neighbors. Just a signed deed, a wire transfer, and a set of keys handed over by a lawyer who raised his eyebrows and said, "You know what this includes, right?" I did. I'd spent months verifying it. The lake, the access road, the shoreline, and yes, every parcel surrounding it, stitched together through old easements and long-forgotten quitclaim deeds into one clean ownership chain. What I didn't buy was membership in the nearby HOA. I declined that immediately. The lake sat calm that first morning, glassy and quiet, bordered by docks that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Across the water, neat rows of identical homes stood like they'd been copy-pasted from the same blueprint. That was the HOA block. Their block. Or so they thought. I poured coffee, watched the fog lift, and figured I had at least a few weeks before anyone noticed I wasn't playing along. I was wrong. 3 days later, while I had guests visiting, friends kayaking, someone fishing off the dock, I heard shouting. Sharp. Commanding. Practiced. A woman in a blazer and oversized sunglasses marched down the shoreline as if she owned it, clipboard in hand, voice already mid-lecture. She announced herself as the HOA president and declared that my guests were trespassing on community lake property. I told her calmly that the lake wasn't part of her HOA and that I wasn't a member. She laughed. Not amused laughter, dismissive laughter. The kind people use when they think they've already won. She demanded dues. I refused. She demanded IDs from my guests. I told her to leave. That's when she pulled out her phone and said the words she clearly enjoyed saying, "I'm calling the police." She did it right there, pacing like a general issuing orders, loudly explaining that a non-compliant homeowner was illegally occupying HOA-controlled land. My guests went quiet. One of them asked if we should leave. I told them to stay put. When the officers arrived, the HOA Karen launched into her story, pointing at the lake, the docks, the homes behind her. She said I was trespassing, refusing HOA authority, and interfering with community property rights. She even claimed I'd forged documents. The confidence was impressive. The accuracy was non-existent. When the officers turned to me, I handed them a single folder. Deeds. Surveys. County records. Consolidation filings. The older officer flipped through slowly, his expression changing page by page. He asked one question. "Do you realize this shows ownership of the entire block behind the lake?" I nodded. That's when the noise stopped. The HOA Karen froze. Sunglasses came off. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried to interrupt, but the officer kept reading. The younger cop stepped away to radio it in. A few minutes later, he came back with confirmation from the county database. The lake wasn't HOA property. The road wasn't HOA property. And the homes? Every single one sat on land leased through an ownership structure that traced back to my newly recorded deed. She didn't just call the cops on the wrong person. She called them on her landlord. Before anything else happens in this story, before the HOA meetings, the legal fallout, and the realization that power works very differently than she thought, hit subscribe. If you like real HOA confrontations where paperwork beats arrogance every time, you won't want to miss what comes next. Once the officers finished confirming the records, the tone of the entire scene shifted. The HOA Karen was no longer loud, no longer commanding. She stood rigid, arms crossed too tightly, eyes darting between the officers and the houses behind her as if seeing them for the first time. One of my guests quietly whispered, "Did he just say you own all of that?" I nodded again, still calm, still letting the paperwork do the talking. The older officer cleared his throat and turned to her. He explained, slowly, carefully, that the HOA had no jurisdiction over the lake, the dock, or the access road. Then he added something she clearly hadn't prepared for. The land beneath every home in her HOA block had recently transferred to a single owner. Me. The homes themselves were privately owned, but the ground leases, easements, and shared access agreements all pointed back to my title. Her face drained of color. She tried to argue that the HOA had always controlled the area, that dues had been paid for decades, that surely there had to be some mistake. The officer shook his head and said, "Ma'am, historical control doesn't override recorded ownership." That sentence hit her harder than anything else. Control was her currency, and it had just been declared worthless. Neighbors started to gather. First one, then two, then a small crowd formed near the shoreline. They'd heard police sirens. They'd seen the HOA president storming around earlier. Now, they were watching her unravel in real time. Whispers spread fast. People pointed at the folder in the officer's hands like it was radioactive. She turned on me then, dropping the Authority Act and replacing it with panic. She demanded to know why I hadn't informed the community. I told her the truth. I wasn't required to. I bought property through legal channels, recorded everything properly, and declined HOA membership. That was the end of my obligations. Her expectations were not my problem. That's when she made her second mistake. She accused me, loudly, of planning to evict everyone. The word rippled through the crowd like a shockwave.
People gasped.
Someone yelled, "Is that true?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the officer step in and clarify that ownership of land didn't automatically mean eviction, but it did mean the HOA needed to stop asserting authority it didn't have. The HOA Karen backtracked fast. Suddenly she was talking about working together, about community harmony, about scheduling a meeting. 10 minutes earlier, she'd called the cops on me. Now she wanted cooperation. The shift was so obvious it almost hurt to watch. One neighbor approached me quietly and asked if the HOA knew about the land situation. I told him the truth. The previous land trust had dissolved years ago, and the HOA leadership either failed to do their due diligence or assumed no one would ever challenge them. His expression darkened. That realization spread faster than any rumor. The officers wrapped things up by issuing a clear warning: no further harassment, no false police calls, and no HOA enforcement actions on property outside their jurisdiction. They left shortly after, but the damage was done. The illusion of HOA control had cracked wide open. As the crowd dispersed, the HOA Karen stood alone by the lake, phone pressed to her ear, whispering urgently to someone who clearly wasn't giving her good news. I watched from my dock, knowing this was only the beginning. Because once people realize who really owns the ground beneath their feet, everything changes. The next morning, the fallout arrived faster than I expected. My phone buzzed nonstop, unknown numbers, blocked calls, voicemails left half-finished. By noon, I finally answered one. It was the HOA's attorney. His tone was polite, strained, and very careful. He asked if we could clarify the situation before things escalated. I told him the situation was already clear. What they were feeling wasn't confusion, it was consequences. Within hours, HOA board members started showing up at my gate. Not yelling this time. No threats. Just awkward smiles and nervous glances at the posted private property signs they'd ignored for years. One of them tried to joke about the whole thing being a misunderstanding. I corrected him. Misunderstandings don't involve calling police to intimidate someone. Abuse of authority does. Word had spread through the neighborhood overnight. People were comparing notes, pulling old documents, rereading deeds they hadn't looked at since closing day. A retired couple knocked on my door and asked, quietly, if their HOA dues had ever actually gone toward land they didn't own. That question alone told me everything. Trust in the HOA wasn't just shaken. It was collapsing. That afternoon, I received an official cease and desist letter from the HOA. It accused me of interfering with community operations and creating distress among residents. I laughed out loud reading it. They were still pretending they had authority, still playing the role, even after the curtain had fallen. I forwarded the letter to my attorney, who replied with one sentence: "They're panicking." Then came the emergency HOA meeting. They scheduled it for the same evening, probably hoping to regain control before rumors turned into revolt. The clubhouse parking lot overflowed. I didn't attend, but I didn't need to. Neighbors texted me updates in real time.
Shouting.
Accusations. People demanding to know why no one had ever told them the HOA didn't own the land. Someone reportedly slammed a binder on the table and yelled, "So, What exactly have we been paying for? That was the moment the narrative flipped. The HOA Karen tried to reframe it as a temporary technicality. She claimed the land ownership was a loophole that would be corrected soon. But residents weren't buying it anymore. They'd seen the police. They'd heard the warnings. And now they were realizing that the HOA's power had always been built on assumptions, not facts. By the end of the meeting, 3 board members resigned on the spot. The next day, official letters went out to residents explaining that HOA enforcement actions were paused pending legal review. That phrase told me everything. They were retreating, quietly,
Carefully.
trying to avoid admitting fault while the foundation crumbled under them. Meanwhile, surveyors showed up at the lake. Not hired by me, by the homeowners. People wanted proof. Lines were drawn. Stakes were placed. And with every marker driven into the soil, the truth became undeniable. The lake, the access road, the common paths, they were all on my land. That's when the requests started changing. No more threats. No more demands. Just neighbors asking about easements, access agreements, and what would happen next. I answered honestly. I wasn't interested in controlling their lives. I just wasn't going to be controlled by people who never had the right in the first place. And somewhere in all of that chaos, the HOA Karen disappeared from public view. No more emails. No more posts. No more authority speeches. Just silence. But silence doesn't mean the fight is over. It usually means someone is looking for a new angle. The new angle came faster than I expected, and it was uglier. 2 days after the emergency meeting, I received a certified letter claiming the HOA was reviewing historical ownership inconsistencies and that my land might be subject to community reclamation. That was the moment I knew desperation had fully set in. They weren't trying to negotiate anymore. They were trying to rewrite reality. My attorney didn't even bother calling them back. Instead, he filed a preemptive motion asserting my ownership, attaching every survey, deed, tax record, and title policy going back decades. It wasn't just solid, it was overwhelming. The kind of filing that doesn't start a fight. It ends one. That same afternoon, the county assessor showed up, unannounced. Not to inspect me, but because residents had started calling the county directly. They wanted answers. They wanted confirmation. They wanted someone official to say what the HOA had refused to admit for years. The assessor walked the property, reviewed the documents, and said one sentence that spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. There is no legal basis for HOA control here. That was it. Within hours, homeowners started questioning everything. Why had the HOA fined them for landscaping? For parking? For lake access rules that never existed? Why had no one ever been shown proof of ownership? Suddenly, every past violation notice felt like a scam instead of governance. Then came the internal collapse. The HOA treasurer resigned first. Turns out, she'd been raising concerns quietly for months and was ignored. Next was the secretary. Then the vice president. Each resignation email leaked into the community group chat. By evening, the board was down to 2 people, both of whom had signed off on calling the police on me. And the Karen? She tried one last power move. She sent out a mass email declaring an emergency reassessment and demanding residents continue paying dues until matters are resolved. That backfired spectacularly. People replied all,
Dozens of them.
asking for proof, demanding refunds, threatening audits. Someone even attached the assessor's written confirmation directly in the thread. By nightfall, the HOA's website went offline. The next morning, a process server showed up at my gate, not for me. For her. Multiple filings. Civil complaints from homeowners demanding restitution for years of improper fines and fees. Once people realized the HOA had no land, no authority, and no legal shield, the fear evaporated. And when fear disappears, accountability shows up. Neighbors who'd barely spoken for years suddenly banded together. They formed a temporary committee, not to fight me, but to dismantle what remained of the HOA. Lawyers were consulted. Votes were scheduled. The phrase dissolution process started appearing in emails. By the end of the week, lake access was quiet, peaceful. No signs. No patrols. No Karen. Just people realizing they'd been controlled by paperwork that never meant what they were told it meant. And as calm returned, one truth became obvious to everyone involved. The cops hadn't been called to enforce the law. They'd been called to protect a lie. And lies don't survive daylight. By the time the dust settled, the neighborhood didn't look the same, because it wasn't the same. A formal notice went out from the county a week later. The HOA's authority was officially under review, and all enforcement actions were suspended indefinitely. That single document did what years of arguing never could. It ended the illusion. People stopped paying dues overnight. The HOA's bank account froze. Vendors walked away. Even the landscaping company pulled its trucks and left half a hedge trimmed. The final HOA meeting happened on a Tuesday evening. This time, there were no speeches. No gavel. No Karen at the front of the room. Just a handful of exhausted residents, a lawyer explaining dissolution steps, and a vote that passed unanimously. The HOA that had bullied, fined, and intimidated people for years was dissolved in under 10 minutes. No drama. No resistance. Just acceptance. A few days later, the same Karen who had called the cops on me showed up alone. No clipboard. No confidence. She asked if we could talk privately. I listened. She apologized, but it wasn't the kind of apology that asks for forgiveness. It was the kind that asks for protection. She was being named personally in multiple civil filings. Turns out, acting on behalf of the HOA doesn't shield you when the HOA never had authority to begin with. I told her the truth. I wasn't out for revenge. I just wanted my land respected. The rest wasn't up to me anymore. It was up to the people she'd tried to control. After that, I didn't see her again. The lake became what it should have always been. Quiet mornings. Families fishing. Kayaks gliding across water that was never public, never HOA-owned. Just peacefully used by neighbors who finally understood the difference between permission and ownership. Some residents approached me about easements. We worked things out like adults. Fair terms. Clear boundaries. No threats. No fines. No nonsense. And the irony? Once the HOA was gone, life got easier for everyone. No rule patrols. No surprise letters. No fear of a knock at the door. Just homeowners actually owning their homes. As for me, I never blocked the road. Never cut off access.
Never needed to.
The power I had wasn't in controlling the neighborhood. It was in refusing to be controlled by people who never had the right. The cops never came back. The HOA never came back. And the lake? It stayed exactly where it always was. On my land.